The founder and CEO of Practice of Innovation, former president and CEO of Stanford Research Institute International, during a time when it employed up to 2,500 people and spun out ventures such as Siri, bought by Apple, and Redwood, bought by Google. The creator of an innovation methodology used by companies and governments all around the world. He'll be talking to us on innovation for impact, adopting value creation best practices across government, academia, and industry. Please welcome Mr. Curtis Carlson.
Well, it's great to be here, back in such a beautiful place with such wonderful people and stunning hospitality, I must say. It's been really a treat to be back here and be with you. You can tell my name is Carlson, so I have some kind of DNA roots here, mostly from Stockholm. So that's a special treat as well. Well, so we want to talk about one part of the innovation issue, which is how are we doing? How's our performance? Now, this is a time of great opportunity, but it's also one of great challenges. The speed of technological change and the level of competition makes it absolutely unique. And in general, if you look around the world, performance is pretty poor. It doesn't matter whether it's industry, tech transfer offices, most of whom lose money, by the way, and startups. I review lots of startups from around the world every year, and most of them are not going to make it. And too often, the innovation practices in government go back into the 1960s and 70s and really are not adapted to the world that we're in. For the last 2 years, I've been part of a National Academy of Engineering study to look at best practices around the world and predict what they recommend what they might look like over the next 20 or 30 years. It's probably too far, but let's say 10 years. And it was a very serious study. If you know the National Academy of Engineering, it's the most prestigious organization of its type in the United States. It's independent, so it's not coming from the government, so people tend to believe it. If it were coming from the government, there'd always be politics as part of it. And the study focused on disruptive opportunities, not interesting ones, use of what we call a value creation guidebook. I'll tell you what that is. And rapid iteration through value creation forums. 3 things that I'll describe to you briefly today. And the improvements that we think are possible are 2 to 10 times or even more in terms of the value created. We're very, very inefficient today. We've had several conversations about, do we have enough money? We actually have a lot of money, but we're not using it very efficiently around the world. I actually think we have plenty of money, we have plenty of really smart people, but we're just not working that efficiently. I was CEO of SRI International for 16 years. When I went, it was failing for 20 years, and it was about to go bankrupt. When I left, we tripled the size of SRI, and we created easily over $100 billion of new economic value. And the same organization with the same people, with the same technologies, with the same customers, with the same location, went from failing to learning how to create a multi-billion-dollar business every couple of years. I think it's almost unprecedented. It's not that we have any smarter people than you have here or any other place. We have smart people. We hire straight-A PhDs from the best schools, Stanford, and what have you. But we changed the way they worked so they could become much more productive. And that applied both to the research as well as to the commercialization part. And you can see some of the things that we've done. Oops, that slide didn't change. Here it is. Yeah, this is the one I wanted to show. So lots of things you know about. Intuitive Surgical is the leading robotic surgery company in the world. We just spun out another one. Nuance, the leading speech company in the world. Siri was a spin-out company that was bought personally by Steve Jobs. High-definition television, and the list kind of goes on and on. Siri is an interesting one. That was a large government-funded program called CALO. We incubated that. We hired what we considered to be the best team in the world. And 6 months after we formed the company, Steve Jobs personally came over to buy it from us. And The point I'm going to make is that one of the things that changed at SRI is how we think about incubating not only the research, but also the ventures. And I'm going to emphasize the use of a value proposition. I don't know if we went around this room how much consensus we'd get on the definition of what a value proposition is, but it's the most important thing, certainly in innovation. Actually, it's the most important thing. You use them every time you make any decision in your life. And if you don't have a common definition, it's very hard to work together productively and efficiently. You know, we're in a challenging time, the global innovation economy, endless opportunities, exponential progress in many technologies, intense competition. I just came back from China. It's going to be tough going forward. We have not seen anything yet. And they're already ahead of the West in many technologies. We kind of don't take that seriously enough yet, but they already are. And there are new business models. So you know Moore's Law. Tesla's kind of a conventional company. They were attacking the big car companies by having a premier quality car, and now they're going to produce a lower cost one, and that's how they're trying to be successful. But you also know about Uber, where they attacked the taxi industry from the side, and the taxi industry really can't do very much. That model is being applied in all kinds of areas now. FinTech, if you're involved in that field, it's full of opportunities where people are attacking the standard finance industry from the side in ways that will be very hard for them to compete. I'm not going to go through this. When I say there are lots of opportunities, you almost go through any of the areas that we've heard about in passing, and they're all open for transformative innovation. Every area. We still don't have clean energy we need. We still don't have, well, just pick one, any of them. The internet doesn't work. Obviously, there's no security yet. We have problems everywhere. And I ask people, how many multi-billion-dollar opportunities are up on that chart? 1, 10, hundreds? It's probably thousands. There's never been a period in the history of the world, I think, like this. This is the golden age for innovation. If you can identify the opportunities and develop the solutions. How are people doing? Well, big companies are not doing so well. This is a curve I like. It shows the lifetime of the top 500 companies. And these big ups and downs are the business cycles where companies will last longer or go away faster. They go away by either going bankrupt or being bought, mostly by being bought. And the lifetime now is down around something like 18 years. So you become one of the biggest companies in the world, and just at that moment, on the average, you got 18 years left, and you're going to go away. The world really is moving faster, and it really is competitive. We all know about Kodak. They went from #1 to out of business in just 10 years. And Nokia set the world's record for being #1 in out of business in 7 years. If you miss just a couple cycles in today's world, you go away. Innovation is a mystery to most leaders. They'll say, they'll give lip service to the idea that the world is moving faster and we need to do a better job in innovation. But if you go into an organization and ask the people to describe their innovation system, you get blank looks. You get blank looks. They have none. And that's what I found all around the world, and you can do this too. You just walk into a company, go up to a middle-level manager, go to a university, go to the tech transfer office, whoever you want to go to, and say, please describe your innovation system. And if you get a blank look, they have none. It's their job to do it. If they don't know it, there is none. And that's a sign you probably don't want to invest in their stock. By the way, parenthetically, companies like Apple, 3M, Gore, they do, and they tend to thrive. Most failures start at the start. So having looked at literally thousands of presentations from basic research up to ventures, what we find that most failures start at the beginning, at the R&D phase. You know, and as you start going along, you start spending a lot of money. So if you're not going to be successful, you want to nip it in the bud right in the beginning. And that's where most of the failures start. They have no value proposition, which I'm going to describe. In fact, in all of our work with big companies, or certainly with startups, less than 20% of them would have any chance of success even if they completed their project. And we don't make that decision. We just give them some tools so they can make that decision. It's kind of sobering. Here you're in one of the top 10 companies in the world, and the chief technology officer, after 2 days of a workshop, goes, well, we have to stop all those projects. They don't have a way to systematically think about what they're doing and evaluate them. In the United States, there are big center programs. You know the National Science Foundation. And they have large center programs, which are combinations of different universities, companies, and research institutes. And the goal of these is to address a major grand challenge problem. If you think about Pasteur's quadrant, where you want to do paradigm-shifting research and have potential impact in society, that's what they're aimed at. That's the kind of program they're at. And if you're an engineer, that's kind of like as good as it can get to be able to be on one of those programs. And there's significant funding. In the United States, they're over $50 million. In places like Singapore, they're up to $150 million for 10 years. And I think that's still real money. But these programs have very mixed results. They generally do not address the major opportunity they have in Pasteur's quadrant. Commercialization is episodic, if at all. And there's modest commercial involvement because the companies don't even know how to talk to the professors about what's going on so they can be engaged in a productive way. Lots of management issues. Poor pre-proposal process, poor problem statement. Finding the key insights that if you hit those things, you gave us some really nice key insights, and if you could solve that problem, you could open up a whole rich area of not only science, but also commercialization. Looking for those and being able to articulate that argument, it's amazing how infrequently that happens. That ability to really identify the key insights, that if it was addressed, you'd change the way the world thinks about that particular kind of problem. Team roles are not well defined, and often wrong teams. I picked friends, or we need somebody from MIT because it'll look good on the proposal. That's not the way to put a team together. Very poor collaboration. PIs tend to focus on their individual parts. They don't work collectively to address the big problem. And if they're all working on their little things, we all know a lot of the little things. Oftentimes I'll do one of these reviews and I'll learn nothing new, even after they spent $75 million. Because in Silicon Valley, we talk about the little stuff all the time. It's the big thing that if you heard it, you'd be surprised and go, whoa, that's really something. But they can only do that by working together. And today, they mostly don't work together. And they have every reason not to. Stanford, as an exception, is moving exactly the other way. They want to focus on these big, important opportunities and put together world-class teams and solve them. And I would say from a motivational point of view, if you're a researcher and you really can identify and work on one of the biggest problems in the world, it is profoundly exciting. And if you really go after that, you can assemble the world's best teams. And if you manage it properly, you'll probably make a huge impact as well. But it takes a different kind of mindset to be able to make that happen. Now, fortunately, people are beginning to realize we're in a different era where the speed and the competitiveness is really different. As I mentioned, for the last 2 years, I've been working on a report that just came out. You can download it from the National Academy of Engineering on best value practices. And I've been doing kind of prototype experiments both in the United States and also Singapore on their big center programs. So we've been taking those ideas and applying them directly to their programs. And not only the ones that aimed at commercialization, but even the most basic ones on research. So I just, last week, I went through, we did a session with the graphene two-dimensional materials group doing really basic research. And it's had a huge impact on the quality, they would say, the quality of their research, the quality of the teams they can put together, and the quality of the proposals they're now writing. So You might ask, well, what's a value creation guidebook? Well, it's, as I was saying to somebody, this is not quantum mechanics. This is really kind of basic things. Definitions of key terms, value creation concepts, and frameworks for thinking about the problem. No different than studying physics, where you have frameworks that you use, and that's how you think about your work productively, and that's how you communicate with your colleagues. It's almost the same thing, but for some reason, we don't teach these concepts. Business schools don't teach these concepts. If you go to an SRI, we had to actually teach all our folks how to think this way. It's processes that accelerate value creation and various tools that also help speed up the process. And by having such a playbook that's shared with the team, you get alignment in terms of what we're doing and how we're working together and the key roles we have shared language and concepts. It just speeds it up. I'll give you an example in a minute. And the concepts, as I said, apply from basic research all the way through to commercialization. And one of the best practices is, if you have a playbook like this, you give it at the start of new projects. So the new team comes together, you put them through a workshop, they work on their project together mostly, and you give them a few ideas, and they work together, and they begin to kick off the program in a much more efficient way. And what we discovered is, if we walk into an enterprise or a R&D team, a university R&D team, if we don't find some of these things in place, then usually success is very low. Now, there are great professors who do this. They know how to do this. I'm not saying people don't know how to do these things. They do. But I would tell you the results that we see are episodic. They're not systematic. Not systematic enough to create the jobs and the prosperity we need both here in Europe and also in the United States. As you know, most economic indicators are really pretty grim when you think about what's happening. I wrote an earlier book about many of the ideas. It was a top 10 book, and we broke the whole process into a number of categories: important customer market needs, value creation, innovation champions, innovation teams, organizational alignment. Just one thing about innovation champions, we had a saying at SRI that we needed somebody to say that they would be the champion of the project, no exceptions, no whining, no complaining. They learn all the stuff that we're going to teach them, and if they didn't want to do it, we weren't going to do it with them. Because the world is so competitive and so hard, if somebody doesn't raise their hand, you're not going to be successful today. So, unfortunately, we found there's a lot of people who want to work that way. They want to learn these skills and be successful. So let me give you just a couple of quick examples before I finish up here. Some people often say, fail fast to succeed early. And I don't like that idea. We obviously, when we do experiments, we just heard from Ursula that you make lots of mistakes, well, of course. But the goal is to learn fast. That's the goal: to learn, search, and create fast. So make intelligent experiments, some of which will fail, but keep on learning to be able to solve the problem. The same thing is true of innovation. It's about learning, searching, and creating fast. And that's the overall metaphor. Anything you can do that speeds it up is good. Anything you do that slows it down is bad news. So here's one. We were talking about what's the definition for innovation. Well, as pointed out, there are lots of definitions. Here's one we like: creation and delivery of new customer value in the marketplace with a sustainable business model. People often forget about the sustainable business model when they're commercializing their technology. If you're a professor, a better definition might be the creation and delivery of surprising new knowledge with sustainable value for society. So, E equals IC squared is sustainable value that actually turned into a huge innovation. So if you're doing research, you want surprising new knowledge. If you're doing innovation, you want surprising new concepts that are also sustainable in the marketplace. Here's a definition of the value proposition we like. What's your important customer and market need? And is it a new, compelling, and defensible approach, including a business model, some way to be sustainable? that provides superior, and usually we were looking for a 2 to 10 times advantage of benefits per cost. That's the definition of value, benefits per cost, when compared to the competition and the alternatives. NABC, it's kind of hokey, but I would say that anything you do in research or in innovation, you always have to answer these 4 questions. One way or another, you have to answer these questions. If you think about a big center and you're selling it to the government, you have to answer these 4 questions. That's what our first couple talks were about. How do you answer these questions? And how do you do it in a simple, compelling way that they'll never forget? They should be quantitative to the extent that you can make them bigger, better, faster, cheaper means nothing. And they need to be really easy to explain, because when we give a presentation, for example, to a government funder, they usually have to sell it to somebody else, and we have to give them the tools to do that. This is what I see around the world. More than 95% of the presentations I see are about the person's idea. So I'm sure none of you have had this experience. Do you have 3 hours? I want to tell you about my idea. The need is obvious. Everybody knows the need. The value, everybody knows it. This will change the world. And nobody's ever done this. There's no competition for this. Have any of you heard that? How many billion times in this room, right? That's what they all sound like. I review venture after venture. They're all like this. This has no value. The chance of success, unless they fix this, the chance of success is basically 0. This is what we see in big companies. This is what we see in these big center programs in the National Science Foundation and in Singapore and in Finland when I was there last year, and I see in Japan, and I see in Taiwan, and by the way, I just saw in China because I was there. People don't answer the most fundamental questions. The next question is, well, how do you learn fast? Because it's about learning and searching and creating fast. We've tried everything. Brainstorming doesn't work. Lots of things don't work. Marking up people's papers doesn't work. None of that goes fast enough. So we tried everything, and we finally hit on this process. Every, let's say, 2 to 6 weeks, depending on what you're doing, all the team members will get together, let's say 4 or 5 teams, and some team member gives a 5-minute pitch, value proposition for their project. Doesn't matter whether it's basic research or, again, whatever. The team then gives feedback, what was good, how you improve it, very positive meeting. And the presenter is quiet getting the feedback for several reasons. One of which is if they're arguing, they're not listening. Number 2, their pitch is so bad that it's not worth arguing about. It's always so bad, it's never worth arguing about. I've never seen an exception to that. You may think I'm exaggerating, but if I could do it here to you, you would see in an instant it's not worth arguing about. And what they have to do is they have to go back and do work in between, and they come back. The learning from this process comes not from the feedback they get for their pitch. The learning happens because they have a template in their head of what the answers are supposed to look like, and then when the next person does it, they either do things that are really good or really bad, and it becomes obvious to everybody in the team. And all of a sudden, the ratchet went up on what is acceptable. If somebody's changing the world with some innovation they're coming up with, everybody wants to reach that level. And the level of competitiveness with the kind of people we hang around with is so profound. If you set it up in a friendly way, they will ratchet themselves up to levels of achievement that are almost unbelievable. They never stop. They never stop. I want to end with a quick example. So here's an important need. That young girl has MS, and those are the kind of devices she has to improve her life and get around. Those are not good solutions. In Japan, we see many solutions that look like this. They've been building robots for a long time. So their idea is let's strap basically an exoskeleton on top of the person, and can augment their ability to get around. Does this look like a solution to anybody? Would you want to put that on a young girl? Would you want to put that on an 80-year-old? It weighs 25 pounds. It lasts for 2 hours. When you walk, you have to move it around because it weighs so much. That's not a solution, right? So our team said, we have to attach it to the body, but before we spend a lot of money, we need to find a way to do that. We need a concept. We need a key insight into the solution that'll let us do that. So someone finally said, what about a Chinese puzzle? You stick your finger in, it can grab, you push it in a little bit, you pull it out, go in, go out. Why can't we put a Chinese puzzle on each leg in a pair of pants? And so when the leg moves, we can sense it, and it'll grab, and then we can push down on the foot. And then when the other leg moves, this one lets go, this one tightens up, and this leg pushes down. Left, right, left, right. And if you were next to the person who is wearing this suit, here's the prototype. It's a pair of pants that last 10 hours. We're now designing designer versions of that will be really sleek and reduced in size. And the point that I want to make here is that our team was able to do this without spending almost any money until we started to really build it. But they had the framework in their head, and they were constantly standing up and iterating the ideas. People that are no smarter than any of your people, and they're doing this all the time because they have a framework and they have an environment where they challenge each other to get the knowledge and the learning that they need to solve these big, important problems. So my hope, my dream is that we can create a transformation in the National Science Foundation that will go through the universities of America, and people will begin to learn these skills as students. And I picked on them because they're the biggest R&D funding agency we've got, private one for the universities, and Singapore because they're the smallest, most respected country for this sort of thing in the world. And I figured if I can do the smallest and one of the biggest, everything else is in between. So Sweden's in between. But my goal is to get them to be profoundly more effective at innovation. It wouldn't be possible if we were limited by opportunities. That is not the case. We're not limited by brilliant people. That's not the case. And we're not actually limited by money. Generally, you see poor performance, and I think it's unnecessary. But you have to go after problems that are important, not just interesting. You have to use best practices. This guidebook that I produced, it'll be out sometime this year. It'll be up on the web for NSF, and you can see what we're doing. You need a way to constantly get the answers and challenge people. And as I said, start each program off with a little workshop to align people and get them to realize that if they work in this more productive way, they literally can change the world. And I think it's the biggest improvement that I see that can happen independent of spending a fortune, which we don't have, and imagining people that don't exist. Thank you.